morning, and welcome. This is Growing Cannabis at Home, and we have the luxury and the privilege of having on with us Judy Rossellison, who is a co-owner and the primary grower for Trailblazing Productions. I almost got tongue-tied there. And Trailblazing Productions is one of the few, like we were just discussing, one of the few licensees in the state of Washington that's approved to sell medical-grade cannabis to patients. So we're really grateful for that extra effort you all take. And good morning, Judy. How you doing?
Morning. Thanks for having me, Trey. It's good to be here. Good to see
Good to
you all
have
again.
you. And so if you haven't joined us before, we have kind of a casual approach. We have a conversation about cannabis, in this case, growing cannabis. And let's just start off by backing up a little bit, because in the previous two episodes, we talked first about getting your home grow environment set up. So we talked about the place in the house that you need to consider, the kind of materials that you might need to consider to get started. So we're talking about a place where you have electricity, where you can have some climate control. Providing a tent allows for kind of creating your own mini microclimate. And so that's one way to make a much larger space smaller. But Jody went through all the details about temperature and air pressure and fans and lights and humidity and all those things that nature usually takes care of, that we can kind of slough off, that all of a sudden, if you're going to pretend to be nature, you have to try to be a good mimic, and it can be a challenge. So we went through all that. And then last week we talked about cloning, and we went through some videos that were produced at Trailblazing with China Moss. And China was fantastic, kind of took us through the steps of, took these big mother plants, and then from the mother plants talked about cutting dozens of clones from them, showed us how to cut some clones, how to root them, how to kind of get them started. So that's where we find ourselves today. So sorry for the long intro, but if you're just catching up today, that's what has happened just before you joined us. So here, we're going to talk a little bit today about, once you get those clones going, Judy, we talked about they would start rooting in the little
root cube.
Yeah, a little root cube, the little peat a lot of people use. And then how do you know you're ready for them to go into soil? Are you flipping them over and looking for a root, or are you going by the calendar?
Yeah, you're absolutely flipping them over and looking for the roots. Okay. After you work with a specific strain for long enough, you'll learn its nuances and can dial in your calendar a little bit more. In general, 7 to 12 days, 2 weeks is a good rule of thumb to have your clones rooting into the root cubes. The root cube sits in a tray that sits in a tray. And so the trays are going to hold the individual sites of the root cubes. And then that tray is going to sit in a tray that's going to hold water. And you'll have to keep your root cubes moist, not soaking. You don't want them to dry up, because you want the roots to be able to propagate and find that water. But if you leave your root cube in the water for too long, your roots will basically begin to rot and mold. And so once you get good root development, then it's time to put them into their first growing media. Simply the dirt, there's peat-based growing mediums, cocoa coir combination. There's usually little white chunks of perlite in there. And so, once you've got a good root system developed, then you want to put it into, a small 4 or 6 inch pot and water it in. You want the soil to be medium compaction. You don't want it to be too fluffy or too packed in there. Once you water it in, then the roots that are there are going to continue to want to suck up that water. And once the roots have found all of the water that's in the immediate area, that basically going to kind of dry up. And so the roots need to go out and find more water. So you're actually forcing the roots to go and find the water. And, you know, it's going to be a number of days, depending on how big of a pot you put it in, until you're going to need to water again. But the best sign, you got to keep a real close eye on it, is right when the leaves start to kind of wilt a little bit. Then you want to water it again. And you can get root rot in your soil mix, just as pretty easy if you overwater it. So this is where you really kind of have to have your green thumb, and pay a lot of attention to the details and watch the plants, so that you don't drown them. Once the roots kind of grow into that pot, then you can grow into a bigger pot, if that's, you know, depends on, you know, how big of a plant you want to grow. And this is all, of course, is in a 20 hours of light, 4 hours of dark cycle. It's called the vegetative cycle. And that plant's going to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow and grow and grow until you switch it to closer to a 12 hours of light and 12 hours of dark cycle.
Gotcha. And I apologize for an interruption. We had I had Blueberry at my feet. That's our Boston Terrier, and she acted like she wanted to get picked up, and then it was just a game, and it was just, so I apologize. So when so we go on, like you said, you're flipping over that rooting cube, looking for the root. I put a picture in the chat, so if you're not familiar, the first one just says roots, so we get an idea of both the machine, or the kind of dome environment we're talking about, and then the second one actually shows the rooting a little bit better. So Judy, you said unless you want to go to a bigger pot later, talk to me about that. I know if we're growing autoflowers, the recommendation is to plant into the pot that you're going to finish in, because autoflower is such a short cycle that it really can't afford any downtime for transplanting. But if you don't have a tight timeline like that, would it because I know some people will start in a solo cup and then move up to a gallon, and then maybe move up to 3 or 5 gallons or bigger. Would you recommend doing the same thing that you do in autos, where you could take the baby and then start in a bigger pot? Or is it just a matter that you're spending more for food, for water, for everything when you have a pot that's too big?
Well, again, it depends on kind of what your objective is. And the size of a growing space you have, and what your kind of end goal is. There, you know, if you want to have one strain is your strain that you know is like your main source of medicine, it really kind of butters your bread, then you may want to have a bigger plant of that's going to be a little bit more developed and provide a little bit more product of that one strain. If you're looking for multiple strains, again, you only have a certain space. And I'm going to assume we're going to be working with a 4 foot by 4 foot growing space, because there's just too many variables to consider once we get outside of that. Mm-hmm. But and a lot of the things that I'll talk about today is going to be like that 4 foot by 4 foot space. So, you know, if you're thinking about looking down at your canopy, if you want to have 3 or 4 strains, you can only have them be about a foot wide. Mm-hmm. If you got one strain and you can have one plant in there that can take up the whole thing, mm-hmm. or 2. So it just kind of depends on what your goal is, on how big of a pot and how big of a plant you want to have.
For sure. And so we were talking about clones. So the nice thing with clones is you know that you always have females, right? Because with seeds, you run a 50-50 chance. You're going to have some boys and some girls, and the boys got to go, right? You can still use the leaves for medicine and that sort of thing. But by the time you find out it's a boy, you spend a lot of time and money to get it to that stage, and a lot of care. And that's okay if that's what you want to do. On the other hand, if you're a patient, especially like if you're a patient in Washington, you could do like I do and call Trailblazing, put in an order say, hey, I'd like 6 clones, and China will tell you, hey, they'll be ready at this time for pickup. And then you know you got all girls, you know what the genetics are, you know they're clean, and you kind of skip a couple weeks or more of development time, And so you get something that's a little bit more sturdy. So that might be something you all want to consider. You don't have to go to Trailblazing, of course, but I just, speaking from my experience, that made it easier. We might have mentioned this before. When seeds can be $10 a pop, and then you run a 50-50 chance, unless you buy feminized seeds, that half of those are not going to bring you flowers. Then seeds really, the economics on them are about $20 a seed, and then you're going to have some failures. So just consider all these things throughout, because you got options, and not the one is better than another, but economics can matter, especially especially like that. So Judy, in this case, you keep going back to, well, we only got so much space, and so help us with that, because some of these plants are just going to want to get a lot bigger than they can get in this space. So do you practice? I know you've got a lot of room to grow, but should people consider topping or femming these plants so that they're getting bushier and not just growing like a tree in a manicured forest kind of thing?
Yeah, I would say kind of regardless of if you're gonna have between 1 or 4 plants, that you are gonna want to top them basically. And I got a whiteboard here, so I'm gonna do some really horrible drawings for you today. But just looking at the side of your plant, if you think about how it's gonna grow, most plants are gonna be, they're gonna go like this out of your pot, and this is gonna be your top cola, and these are gonna be smaller, and these are gonna be smaller, and these are gonna be basically insignificant as you get towards the lower part of the plants. So one thing that's very commonly done is topping. So as the plant is growing, see if I can do it a little better this time. You're gonna have a branching structure that's gonna look something like this. Can everybody see that all right? And so by topping in a really simple form basically means you're going to cut the plant off here, and this all goes away. So instead of having one top that's closest to the light, you can essentially then have 4 tops, because although these look like they're stacked on each other, when you look from the top, it's going to look more like they're looking down at the top of the pot. And you either do a 4, or very often just leave the bottom 5 branches, and you can fan them out. Instead of them having one main cola, you take those 4 or 5 branches and you lay them out. And on those branches, you're also going to have side branches. They're all going to have their own branches off it. So when you lay it down, all of those side branches on that one branch are going to want to come up. And instead of now having 1 cola at the top, you can have 20, all at about the same level. And so whether you're going to do 1 pot or 1 strain in the middle of your tent, or 2 or 3 or 4 plants, if you top them all you're going to get all about the same size of nuggets in the end, because you got one branch laid out with all these other branches coming up, and this tips up at the end too, and you can have 15, 20 little colas that come up. And so that's called topping. And I can stop there real quick and see if there's any questions.
Judy, I just dropped a picture in of one person who was topping their plant right before harvest, so you can get an idea of the idea of multiplying that one cola into several. And so you see the benefit of this. And this is one of those things that became increasingly popular in the 80s and 90s at the height of the drug war, when people had limited amount of space and we talk about economy, needed to make as much off of one plant as they could as far as production. And so they lollipopped it, like we've talked in the past. They stripped some of those lower branches that just end up creating those little popcorn buds that are a lot of work for a little bit of product, and then push that development up. And now, Judy, every time you're going to top, you're going to slow the growth for a little bit, but then it'll catch back up, right? The plant is hardy and will rebound generally.
Yeah, it shocks it pretty good, and so there's a stress reaction to which the plant kind of stalls out a little bit and recovers, but it's no more than a couple of days. But that's not only is it productive in getting as much square footage as you can, but it keeps the plant shorter, because everybody's got a ceiling that's indoors, whether it's the top of your closet, top of a building, top of a tent, there's going to be a limited height. And once you start stacking lights and fans and all the other things on there too, you can run out of room real quick. So in order to keep them as short as possible, this is the number one way to kind of manage the height of your plants.
And it's awfully frustrating if you've got a 6-foot tent, which is really a 4.5-foot tent, maybe with lights, or a 4-foot tent, and all of a sudden, and then your plants can only get so close to the light depending on how hot that light is. All of a sudden your plants have outgrown your space. And then once they're up and starting to get some burn from those lights, if you're not using LEDs, you're in a fix. Yeah, you can try to bend them and do some creative stuff, and people do. Some people will, like you said, turn that main branch sideways and let a lot of colas grow straight off that main branch. That people have done that too. So there are other ways to get there, but it takes some work. And so you really want to be out in front of it. And this goes back to genetics too. When you're picking a plant, if you're looking at genetics and you see, they'll give you some plant characteristics and it says this plant wants to be, 6 to 8 feet tall. You got to consider that. Can you still grow it? Probably, but you're going to have to do a lot of manicuring to keep it from being what it wants to be. You're going to have a bonsai version of that original.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Nicole, do you have a question?
I did. It's funny. It has to do with what he just said, in that I know nowadays, like the sativa and indica plants, it's more that everything is just some combination of a hybrid. But it's more commonly known like that sativas grow tall and thin versus indicas being short and fat. So is this something to put into consideration with topping? Like, would you want to maybe top a sativa less, or is it just the same concept depending on the plant?
I would say same concept depending on the plant. And like you accurately said, most strains are hybrids that you're going to find these days. There's very few people growing land races. But even then, the various strains, some are going to grow taller than others and have a longer internodal space, the space between the branches on the stem. And then, if you top it and you've got those side branches, there's spaces between the side branches on those main branches. So, you're really not going to know what you get until, especially if you're going with seeds, once you work with clonal population over and over and over again, they become really predictable and what's going to happen. But we had one strain, our Dutch 47 was a beast, and it just grew through the roof every time. every time, and it was a lot of work to try and maintain and keep it in a manageable sense. Eventually, we experienced genetic drift, where once you take a clone, and you have to restock your mother stock, and a clone of a clone of a clone of a clone of a clone, and you just lose a little bit of that DNA as you go, and eventually it just was gone. We lost it, but we had some other seeds, and so we did some more pheno hunting, and the best one that we kept out of that batch didn't grow that tall and crazy.
Huh.
Kept all the characteristics of the terpene and cannabinoid profile, but it only grew to like 5-6 feet instead of
interesting
the height that it wanted to be. Yeah, actually it's like probably 4 feet instead of being like a 6 feet. And when 2 feet's a lot of room when you're in an 8-foot room.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm muted. Great question, Nicole.
There you go.
Anybody else with a question right now? Yeah, Goose.
Yeah, so I'm assuming that like when you're topping would be a decent time to make clones if you're going to clone.
Yes, that's absolutely an okay thing to do, and that's what a lot of people do. It's if you're going to continue to propagate your one strain. Again, it depends on your the amount of space that you have, but yeah, that top plant material can be great if you just take the side branches, put them in your root cubes, start that process. And a lot of people will top just before it goes into flower, and most strains are about 60-day strains, about an 8-week strain, and so that gives 2 to 3 weeks in your clone tray, 2 to 3 weeks in your smaller pot, and then 2 to 3 weeks in your next bigger pot, ready to go into flower again. So it's a really good way. The timing you can set the timing up for the next plant to be ready right when you harvest, as long as you've got enough room. You can't be in the same tent because you got different light cycles going on. And so, if you've got 2 tents, you can have a veg tent and a flower tent. That's a really good way to cycle your clones.
Cool,
good question.
Yeah, kind of like photography. Once you start doing it, you do want more tools and a separate tent, and then a little area for babies and cloning, and it can get in your blood. But
next thing you know, you have a 20,000 square foot warehouse.
For sure. But yeah, start small, and then just you're gonna have to become familiar, right? But that's a great question, because so many people, and I'm guilty, will start a crop and then finish it and go, okay, what's next, and not have had that head start. And you really need to have a head start, because you can be so preoccupied with the one you're growing and not anticipating the next, and then you lose all that launch time, right?
Yeah, you harvest and you're like, oh my gosh, I gotta go get clones now. And you start it all over again. So
do be anticipatory as you practice growing, because it'll mean the difference of another grow cycle for you in a year, maybe 2, if you're doing it right.
So as I've done a couple of outdoor grows, I've got a really nice south-facing, heated, if it's a good weather, I usually end up a couple weeks short on the end on my flower cycle. But that being said, should I be topping my outdoor plants as well? I've had a sativa that grew up to about 8 foot tall with some really good girth that provided a lot, but it was actually it was taking too much space, and it was a lot of work.
Yeah, that's, I wouldn't say that you should. I would say that most people don't top their outdoor plants just because they don't have the height restriction. Yep. But I don't think there's any reason why you couldn't. Okay. But yeah, I don't think most people just kind of let them go. And then, kind of the next step, which I was going to lead into, unless there's any other questions on kind of this topping, is lollipopping. So you lay your branch out, and that branch has branches coming up off of it, and those branches are going to have branches coming off of it. Right when you start to see the buds forming and the pistils coming out, like right when you first, so once you flip to flower, the 12-hour on of light cycle, that's going to trigger its flowering. And that's the beginning of the end for that plant. But it's still going to stretch for 1 to 2 to maybe 3 weeks. And then after 2 to 3 weeks, you're going to start seeing the little buds start to form. And that's the next time where you need to start lollipopping, which is, so you've got a singular branch coming up that's got, 3 to 5 little branches coming off of it. You want to leave the fan leaf. So there's gonna, here's a stem, main stem. You're gonna have a fan leaf that comes out, and then you're gonna have another stem that's gonna want to bud up. You're gonna leave the fan leaf, but you want to cut off all of the other stems that would be other buds, because when you leave the fan leaf, it's like a solar panel for that bud. But if you take that bud away, it sends the energy up. You leave this fan leaf, you take that little stem away, it keeps sending up. And so instead of having a bud like this at the top, and a bud like this in the middle, and a bud like this on the bottom, you can have a bud like this at the top. It's all going to go up. And that's going to take some time, but it's 100% worth it.
And it feels like you're wiping your plant out, and it looks like it. And I put a picture in the chat. Judy, tell me if that's what you have in mind, because you talk about leaving some fan leaves. You might not strip it as bare as that photo, but
I see. I don't know how to. I can either download it, but I can't open it.
Can you click to open?
Lollipop. Get a download. Well, let me.
Oh, sorry, man. Okay.
Are
y'all able to? The rest of you, are you able to click to open?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
What are you guys doing to open? I'm sorry, I don't weed real well, but I'm not good at computers.
Just double click it. I think double click works.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I got the arrow, and the arrow doesn't do anything. I only can do is a download. Does it say?
Huh. Let me see if I can just drop it in the chat here. No, maybe I can't. It's okay, but the idea is that from a certain point down, it's bare. It's just stems. Or are you saying you would leave an occasion the biggest fan leaves on the lower parts?
Yeah, I would leave the fan leaves. I would leave all the fan leaves.
Okay.
As it's growing, through this stage.
Okay.
Again, we're only in week like 2 or 3.
Okay.
When we're doing this.
So the picture I posted was a more severe, like everything down, stripped off approach.
Yeah. We leave all the fan leaves there.
Good to know.
Because the plant is still growing.
Mm-hmm.
There's still some stretch going. Those leaves are still getting a little bit bigger, and those leaves are sucking up the CO2 and the light, and so that's your growth source. That's where all your photosynthesis is happening.
Good deal. And keep in mind, you all, if you're not using these leaves, think about how you can be using them. I'll take mine, I'll strip them down, put them in a paper bag in the freezer. Just let them just stay in there. They get a little frostbitten probably, but then take them out, and I can make butter. I can make topicals with them, stuff like that. The stuff that you don't need to be super strong, but at least you're still getting some of the benefit of the plant, other than just throwing it away. Like Judy's, he said you're taking yours and it becomes worm food now, right?
Yep.
So
composting worms.
So yeah, think about repurposing. It's one of those, minute to learn, lifetime to master. So anytime you can clean up your process and make it more sustainable, and then that's a great thing. So we're not just throwing this stuff away, because I know patients right now, they would love to have your fan leaves. We're not supposed to share in Washington, but just know there are a lot of patients that would like you not to throw this in the trash. So Judy, where from there? So we've done some lollipopping, we've thinned out underneath. How do we know it's time for these things to go into flower? Or are there other things we need to be looking for before that?
Yeah, no, yeah. Once as the plant matures, the pistils on the buds, they come out and they're all really bright white pistils, and that's that part of the plant is what is basically waiting for a piece of pollen to hit it. And so once it senses it hits a piece of pollen, pistil comes in, and that's when you start growing seeds. That's why you don't want males in your garden. So the pistils, they're all really bright white. And as the bud matures, I'm sure you can see in the final product, they start to turn orange. And that's one sign of maturity of the bud. When you get, 50–60% of your white pistils that have turned orange, orange or red. If you want to buy another cool little gadget, you can buy a little loupe, little magnifying glass, and actually look up close at the trichomes. Depending on the bulbous head of the trichome, sometimes you can see them with your naked eye. My eyes aren't all that good, and so I always prefer to use a loupe. But the trichome heads will go from clear to milky to amber as they mature. And depending on whether you have a sativa or indica, you can harvest a little earlier, harvest a little later. Generally, the more mature and more amber the trichomes get, typically can lead to a more sedative effect. But if you want to just time it just right, if you get about 20% of your trichome heads amber, and that's time to harvest. But one thing you do want to keep in mind is, there, in general, if you get a clone or a seed or whatever, they'll tell you it flowers in 50 to 60 days, 60 to 70 days. It's kind of its life cycle. A lot of them are about 60 days. And so it's a really good guide, and I would heed to that information that they're giving you, and plan for about 2 weeks before you're thinking you're going to harvest. Stop any kind of nutrients, because then you want to start flushing out all the nutrients in your plant. Because if you don't, I'm sure you've all tasted some weed that kind of has a chemically taste, not like the diesels that we're looking for, but like just kind of a funky chemically taste. The buds will kind of snap and pop a little bit as you smoke them. And then the truest test is the end of your smoke, and you got your empty bowl. Is the ash white or black? And if the ash is black, then it just didn't get flushed right, and that's going to give it the funky taste. So you always want to make sure that the last 2 weeks you're just putting water in, because it needs the water to live, and it'll pull all the nutrients that are still in the soil. It's still going to suck all that up and still do the photosynthesis and all that stuff, but you just want to have enough time for it to get all out and turned in, used up in the photosynthesis and turned into plant matter. So you want to stop giving it any nutrient for at least 2 weeks before you're done.
And if you don't mind, I'm gonna back up a little bit.
Yep.
Because I kind of asked you this question already, but so I've got my plants in veg still. Some people want to really grow them out. They're like, no, I think I can. These plants can be bigger before I turn them to flower. Is that an accident to think that way, or are you thinking more strictly, hey, when they've been under this 18-hour cycle of light, I really want to only grow them for about this period, and then they need to start thinking about flowering?
No, you can grow them and grow them and grow them, really. And that's one of those things that, I don't want to go down that road too much, but, a lot of like light companies will say, 3 pounds per plant. Well, if you grow your plant out and veg it out for 3 months, you can get 3 pounds from that one plant. Or you veg your plants out for a month and you get a pound per month, depending on how many cycles you can get in a year. If you veg it out for a month versus 3 or 6 months, you might get bigger harvests, but if you have more harvest, it can all equal out in the end. So your biggest factor is going to be how big is your space.
Okay.
And I would suggest keep them small. Keep them small until you know what you're dealing with.
Because once you make that change from an 18-hour light to a 12-hour light, talk to us about how that affects the growth of the plant. Because if I'm in a tent and they're already 3 feet tall when I start them into flower, is that going to be a problem? What kind of growth am I anticipating once they go into flower?
I would say you're probably going to get another, again, depending on the strain, 25 to 40% more stretch.
Okay.
Yeah, start small, easy, manageable. That's going to be more fun in the end, not having to wrestle it.
Mm-hmm. And if you got LEDs, y'all, you can put them on a little pulley system. So it's a lot easier to raise and lower your lights if you got a good setup than it is to try to continue to stack your plants and bring them to the light. Of course, anytime they're up on stilts, you risk them falling over and that sort of thing. So try to make it easy on yourself. A lot of the tents will already come with a little harness system, little pulleys. And so it makes it kind of easy. You just lower both of the single or 2 lights, whatever you got. Talk to us a little bit, Judy, about the distance to the plant. And I know that can be a very specific conversation with, people using light meters and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Is there just some good basics to keep in mind when it comes to how close do you want your plants to the light source?
Definitely no more than 2 feet, depending on what kind of light you're using. But that's almost a whole nother discussion. But in the beginning, I'd say if you're using an LED light, you would keep it, at least 2 feet off the top of your plant. And like you said, there's little like ratchet strings that you can raise and lower the elevation of the light. So always try and bring the light down to the top of the plant and raise it as it grows.
And people will get real specific with their little par meter and just like they would in photography, and they'll see, what's your reading up close to the plant and what's your reading down low. And that used to be a problem with the LEDs, is they really wouldn't throw light very far. And so people were afraid to grow with them, thinking, well, only the top of my plant is going to get enough light. But they've improved tremendously. You were talking about it before.
Definitely.
So any questions, you all? Thanks for letting me back up on that.
Yeah.
Anything? Okay. We talked before too, when you go into flower, you're going to start getting the most odoriferous part of the grow cycle. Like before, you might have had a really nice, oh, that's pleasant, that I could smell weed in the house. But when you go to flower, there'll be no mistaking, and so it's like Yankee Candle strength of terpenes, right?
Yeah.
Which is just kind of extreme. So that might be fine with you. On the other hand, if you have kids or you have any reason that you don't want all your clothes to smell like weed or something like that, then like Judy has mentioned, you can get an air scrubber, a carbon filter that will cycle. You don't even have to necessarily put it in the tent, but maybe near the tent. In the tent would be, while it's still contained, might be the way to go. But make sure all that air is expelled from the grow space, and keep your filters changed and that sort of thing. So, but it is nice, especially at night when the lights are off. It seems like the longer in darkness, they just start kind of, mine in the case in my hallway, you just walk by it, it's so pleasant. I really want more people to get to experience that, because it doesn't smell like it smells in the jar.
No.
So, but do consider your neighbors, because depending on what you're growing, it can be, hey, Judy, by the way, in my closet right now, the most beautiful plant I have is a 9-pound hammer from you guys. And I challenged them a little bit. I was using the wrong nutrient. I was doing the math on it wrong and got behind. 9-pound hammer continue to thrive. She's like, no, we're all right. We're gonna keep doing this.
Were you a little heavy on the nutrients?
I was a little light on the nutrients, and so I was just, anyway. Make sure you know how many. It sounds so basic. Make sure you know how big the watering can you're using that you're mixing into it is. I assume mine was a 1 gallon. It was a 2 gallon, and so I was feeding it half of what it should have gotten, and I was also doing some experimenting. But anyway, yeah. Thanks to you guys. Thanks for that. So we're in flowering now. We've got our. You're talking about a 60-day plant. Are you talking about day 60 or day 75 is harvest? What's day 1? You talk about when the seed goes in the ground?
Day 1's when you flip to the 12-12 light cycle.
Okay. Yeah. So that everybody's aware, you're still in for like 2 months just in the flower cycle. And you do want to make sure, go ahead and keep a chart handy so that you know what's up, so that you remember what you fed them when, because if you end up having a stellar crop, you'd like to be able to repeat that process. And if you screw up a little bit, you'd like to learn that too. So keep a little chart. It's not overdoing it. It's not being a brainiac. It's a lot of information to try to remember. And so just make it easier on you.
We take note of the temperature and the humidity every day as well. Just to make sure that you're looking, because if it gets out of whack and you're not looking, things can go wrong real quick. So yeah, we do temperature and humidity every day.
And seasons change, and you might, if you're like us, come spring, we'll leave the windows open for months. And so all of a sudden, think about how that's going to affect your grow environment. If you're in a tent, might not be a big deal at all, but think about those changes that you're doing environmentally that surround that grow space, and how just keep an eye on it, because it will change on you. Goose?
Yeah, hey, Judy, so let's say if I'm going to do another, couple plants outdoors this year, is there a specific temperature minimum, like, over the top of a minimum that I should start out, and also kind of a specific date with sunrise, sunset that I should get my plants off of whatever lighting I'm using outside and go into, the natural world outside with?
Obviously you want to make sure that you're not going to hit any more freezes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always a gamble to any outdoor farmer. I think, as long as you've got an established hardened off plant, it's going to be fine. As we know, the hours in the day are going to get longer through the summer until we hit the equinox and it starts to kick back. I think, as long as you're in, end of April, May.
Perfect.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
And that's, if you could do it, dudes, that's the way to do, especially in Pacific Northwest, because if you try to wait and start them outside, you can run out of season real fast. But if you can put plants out that are already a few weeks old, I think you'll find a better return and less frustration at the end.
Cool. My seeds are growing right now. I only lost 1 seed out of my 5. I think I waited too long as they sprouted. They sprouted too high, and by the time I put them into the soil, I had 1 that kind of kinked over. But I think I'm gonna have 4 good seeds as of right now.
Good deal. Good deal. And if you do go with seeds, you all consider seeds that have been bred in the area where you're growing. Yep. Rather than try to buy some fancy Dutch or Spanish seeds, see what local folks are growing. Here, in the case of Western Washington, Vashon has a long history of seed breeders, and there's some stuff over there has been trialed out through Pacific Northwest summers for years and years. So consider that. You're also supporting local commerce that way. So Judy, we've got them in flower even before harvest. You talked about trichomes and talked about using a loop, which is great advice, because there's no substitute. You can have pretty good eyes, but until you put on, like a jeweler has, and let me see if I have one handy. I do.
I got one here, Trey.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep. Just so happens to see it on my desk.
Yeah. So they're inexpensive. They're got a little light built into them. I think this one, my battery is dead, but There you go. And so it makes a world of difference. If you already use glasses, it's a little tricky, but it'll work. But it'll just get you up close and personal. And then, like you said, Judy, what are you looking for? You said you're looking for the amber. Is it a percentage you look for? Is it the first amber and it's good to go? Or does it depend on cultivar?
Depends on cultivar, but you know, general rule of thumb, 10 to 20% of amber.
Okay. I thought you said that. And so, and different growers will have different goals. If you're patient and you want something that's not quite so heavy in CBN, you know, the longer you leave it on the plant, the more likely it is for some of those cannabinoids to convert to CBN, which is a heavier, more sedating cannabinoid. So some people will want to harvest a little bit earlier, so they have a little bit more acidic forms of some of the cannabinoids and less CBN, and then other people who are looking for something a little heavier might leave it on. But there is also a point at which you've waited too late, right?
Yep. And the cannabis plant will self-propagate. It wants to keep on living and make sure that there's more of it. So if you leave it, let it go, it'll bolt just like a lettuce and self-seed, and it has definitely gone too long.
And so it'll self-seed. It'll also you talk to us about bud rot. Is that solely about it getting rained on, or is that also an aging thing that after some point it just starts to degrade like any flower?
I think it just pretty much has to do with the humidity and the density of the buds. You know, we even come across it every once in a while here. If a cola gets too big and too dense, and doesn't have, you know, maybe it's a little too close to the wall and doesn't get the best air circulation around it. Mm-hmm. The pictures of big, really dense, heavy buds. A lot of times there can be some yuck in the middle of them. So I prefer to have more medium size, you know, golf ball to you know, soda can, beer can size buds. Yeah, the really big ones there's just not enough airflow in the middle of them, and they get moist.
And so you really don't want to get rained on if you can help it. We have the benefit of not having a whole lot of rain around here, but if you get too much, and I just posted this picture, it's just so frustrating. It'll happen pretty quickly too. And you go to check out the bud, and it just like crumbles. You know, in the end, you see the core is just brown and decayed,
brownish, moldy, rotten. Yeah.
And then you get insects too. You know, insects can cause that kind of looking damage as well, just from eating out the important core part. So you gotta keep an eye out for that goose. So as you go outside, you're going to be at the mercy, or not at the mercy of, but you're going to be exposed to insects that want to eat the plant. You can plant some beneficial plants around it, you know, like lemon balm, oregano. There are different plants that can help repel bad bugs, you know. Yeah. So look up, there are lists of plants online to grow near your cannabis that can help. I started growing peppermint and chocolate mint, lemon balm, and all that right around my stuff, and it's helped tremendously. I also put in a little ground crop. I'll grow microgreens as a soil cover. And to me, I don't know if it might be helping the soil, and I hope it's helping the soil, but to me, the microgreens are like my barometer. They're the first to wilt before the plant does. So if it starts drying out, I can look at them and say, hey, the soil, and it's just telling you about the topmost point. And like Judy said, you really have to pay attention to what the bottom of the plant looks like. But for me, it's helped as kind of a flag to say, hey, we're starting to dry out here, you know, at least measure.
Yep. And so once we're getting to kind of the end of the cycle, and you know that harvest day is coming up, we do a pre-harvest, which we go through. So along the growth cycle, as the plant continues to grow and develop, and I remember I said earlier, leave the fan leaf when you're lollipopping. As the above leaves continue to grow, they're going to shadow out the bottom leaves. And so as you go, you can always go through and pull and thin. And if some of them are going to turn yellow, and that's okay. You can pull a few of those fan leaves as you grow through the cycle. But then once we're getting close to harvest time, we'll pull all of the fan leaves and let the plant sit with no fan leaves for a couple of days. And that's kind of gives the plant one last kind of stress shock, and triggers the last little bit of the sugar production and trichome production, the kind of defense mechanism before we harvest and hang.
You talking all the fan leaves or just the lowers?
All of them.
Really? So and
Yeah,
about how long?
All of them that aren't in the buds.
Right.
Those would be more sugar leaves.
Mm-hmm.
But we pull all the fan leaves off.
And then how long would you say after you've done that step are you going to harvest? Are you talking within 48 hours or? 2
to 3 days, yeah.
Okay. And once again, hold on to those leaves. They are valuable. So that's great, Judy. It sounds doable. We hope. We know we're throwing a lot of details at you, but it's a live and learn thing. You're going to get your fingers sticky, and you're like, oh wow, that's what. And then you start realizing, like some of the oldest hash in the world was made from people who are handling colas, and then they rub that resin off their fingers till they have a hash ball. The charos was some of the first forms of hash. So you start making these connections, and then you have, once you dry your plants, then you have options of processing your own hash if you choose to do that, or doing some fresh rosin press stuff if you're a dabber. So it gives you so many options at home, and really does put you in touch with this wonderful plant. So, and that's the point. We just want you to be more in touch and kind of understand it better, whether you're selling it, helping advise other people on how to use it, how to purchase it, and that sort of thing. Judy, we are at time, and I appreciate you always. I always learn, and thanks for being patient with us and patient with my questions that can be elementary sometimes.
My pleasure, Trey.